As I get to about the third stair, my legs are starting to dissolve. And as I got to the top of the stairs, I had lost all form and I was just a ball of energy. And at that point, the stairs go off to the left and I didn't bother. I just went through the wall and I came out right over where my wife was sitting and she was painting children's faces.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Ask Julie Ryan Show. It's where we blend spirituality and practicality to help you live a life of purpose and joy. I am so excited about today's show because we have Dr. Tony Cicoria as my guest. Dr. Cicoria is a retired orthopedic surgeon who was struck by lightning, experienced an NDE, and as a result has developed a passion for playing the piano and composing music. So as you can imagine, I have a boatload of questions for him. Please remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this episode with your family and friends. Now let's go chat with Dr. Cicoria. Tony, welcome to the show. I'm so thrilled to have you join us today.
Thank you, Joy, and thank you for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure. Struck by lightning and an NDE. Holy Moses, I can't even imagine. Tell us what happened.
Well, my wife, in her family, there were 4 or 5 people who have birthdays in August. And so they had to decide to have a communal birthday party so it would be easier for everybody. So there were 25 plus people and kids running all over the place. And they had rented a pavilion at a place called Sleepy Hollow Lake, which is in Athens, New York, just below the capital of Albany. And my job was to run the barbecue. And so this pavilion was a 2-story job, and I'm on the bottom, the dirt floor, where all the picnic tables are, and the family's up on the 2nd floor. And they're having a wild time. A lot of kids, and it's just crazy. And so I was actually grateful to be outside and quiet. And I had the place that they rented was right next to the lake. And unbeknownst to me, a big storm cloud had blown up over the lake. But I was busy and wasn't paying any attention. And about mid-morning, I had decided that I wanted to call my mom because she wasn't going to be there and I wanted to be sure that she was doing okay. So I walked around the front of the building and on the front of the building, there was a payphone attached. And so I walked over to the payphone, I dialed her number and she doesn't answer. And I'm thinking, okay, I'll call back later. So I'm getting ready to hang up the phone, and I take the phone from my face and I get about a foot away, and all of a sudden I see this huge flash of light come out of the phone and it hits me in the face and just throws me back like a rag doll. I felt like I'd been kicked by a horse, and I went flying backwards. And as I'm flying backwards, all of a sudden I have this strange sensation of moving forwards. And I remember standing there absolutely bewildered, and I kept, my mind is racing because I knew exactly what had happened. I knew every millisecond of what transpired. And now I'm standing here and I'm trying to make sense of this because I look at the wall and the phone is just dangling, and I'm standing here and I just absolutely bewildered. I could not make any sense at all. And then all of a sudden, I hear my mother-in-law screaming, and she's at the top of the stairs, and I'm at the bottom. And she starts racing down the stairs right at me, but she's looking off to her left. And I thought, well, this is pretty strange. She's looking down the stairs like I don't even exist. And she got down to the bottom of the stairs right in front of me, and she took off to her left. And I thought, holy mackerel, what the hell is going on? And so I turned and I took a few steps to follow her, And all of a sudden, I'm confronted with myself on the ground. And the first thought that came to my mind was, oh shit, I'm dead. And it was a terrible shock to me, no pun intended. But I always expected that, when you die, there'd be some sort of a warning that you've left the stage somewhere and something's happened. But there was nothing. There was nobody to talk to me. There were no bells, whistles, or anything else. And so I walk over to my body, and I'm looking down at myself, and my mother-in-law's over there on the left side, and there was a lady and her young daughter who was an early teen. They were standing there waiting to use this phone. So, I get struck by lightning, and it turns out there's somebody that's standing there waiting to use the phone. Turns out she was a nurse. So she starts getting down to do CPR, and I can hear everybody, I can see everybody, but nobody can hear or see me. And I remember thinking, this is really crazy. But one of the first thoughts that came to me was, I'm thinking just the way I normally would. My mind is racing, and I'm thinking exactly the way I would normally and in the same vernacular, however crude that might be. And at that point, I thought, well, hell, there's no point in standing here. I don't, can I go upstairs and check on my family? So I turned around and I started walking toward the stairs, and I started going up the stairs. And as I walk upstairs, I always look down because I don't want to trip and fall on my face and embarrass myself, which I've done. And as I started to go up the stairs, I get to about the third stair, and as I'm looking down, my legs are starting to dissolve. And I thought, okay, this can't be good. And as I got to the top of the stairs, I had lost all form, and I was just a ball of energy. And at that point, the stairs go off to the left, and I didn't bother. I just went through the wall, and I came out right over where my wife was sitting, and she was painting children's faces. And at any rate, so I pass over her head, and I'm going diagonally through the room. And I see the rest of the family, and they're all having a great time. And I went through the roof, and when I went through the roof, things really changed. All of a sudden, felt like I had fallen into a river of pure positive energy. There was absolutely nothing but absolute love and absolute peace in this stream of energy. And it was coming from this bluish white light that was off to the right. And I remember looking at this light, and I was absolutely absorbed by it. And I just couldn't believe how it made you feel. Just, if you could imagine absolute love and absolute peace, there was nothing else mixed in with it. But what was even more amazing was that I could see the energy. And when I say see the energy, I could actually see the streams and the frequencies that made up that light energy. And it reminded me of a sine wave. I have no idea what the frequency of it was, but I was able to look at that stream of energy, and it went through everything and actually made up everything. And I remember thinking, this must be the God energy. And, and because I had been a research scientist before I was in medicine, my brain is, my science brain is just spinning like crazy going, hey, I can measure this. And, I had this magical thinking there for a few minutes. But then the realization comes to me that this is the most amazing thing that could ever happen to somebody. to be able to experience this. And it was taking me someplace. It had speed and direction. Had no idea where I was going, but I was going someplace, and I was happy to go. And then it as I was going in this pathway, I see this big collage of pictures, if you will. There were just high points and low points in my life, and things that were noteworthy, but it was just a bunch of pictures, and there was not a lot of discussion about it. It was just, hey, this is your life, buddy. And so I looked at all of that and just kept going. And as I was progressing down this river, I came to the realization that this is amazing. I was ecstatic, thinking how great it was. And then all of a sudden, it was like somebody flipped a switch, and I was back in my body, and I was so angry. I'm like, no, don't make me come back here. I don't want to do this. But I realized it's not my choice. And so at that point, I'm back in this body, and I have a burn on my face and a burn on my foot. And it felt like somebody had stuck a hot poker in both places. And I'm still unconscious. And I can't open my eyes. I can't say anything. But the lady who was kneeling next to me had stopped doing CPR. And she was just kind of kneeling there. And after a few minutes, I was able to open my eyes. And I looked at her, and I wanted to say thank you for saving my life. But unfortunately, the only thing that came out was, it's okay, I'm a doctor. And she just laughed and said, well, you weren't a minute ago.
Oh.
And I'm like, okay, I'm not thinking very clearly here, so I'm just going to shut up and go home. I really was struggling. I went back to work and started going on about my business, thinking I was the same. But things had changed, which took a while to come to the surface. But I went back to work, and people that knew me well sensed that something was different about me, which I was not aware of, but that would all come out as time went on. And so I went back to my normal routine. So I, working my 12 or 14 hours a day, and surgery and taking care of patients. And that's what I did. And about 2 weeks after the lightning, I started having this insatiable desire to hear classical piano music, which was a big departure for me. I was a kid of the 60s. There was rock and roll, and there really wasn't much of anything else. When I was 7 years old, my mom had made me take piano lessons for a year, which I did out of threat of life and limb. And, I did it. And after that year, I promptly quit because there's too many other things like baseball and football and fishing and exploring to do. So that died a rather rapid death, so to speak. And then, but this music, just would not stop. It was just, I was really driven to hear this music. And it was so much so that I drove to Albany, an hour away, because we lived in Oneonta, New York. And I went to this music store because, where we lived was a small town. There weren't a lot of music places there. And I went into this store, and as I came in the door, it seemed like this CD jumped off the shelf into my hands. And it was Vladimir Ashkenazy, a famous Russian pianist, playing his favorite Chopin. And so I listened to the music, and I was absolutely smitten with the music. I could not stop listening to it. And I took it to work, and I made everybody else listen to it while I was doing surgery. And I made my family listen to it. I'm sure that they were all sick of it, but I couldn't get enough. And this went on for a couple of weeks, and I realized that it's not going to be enough for me to listen to all of this. I need to learn how to play it. And that was a problem since I didn't have a piano and I didn't know how to play. So, it's like, okay, it's a nice thought, but where the hell's that going to go? But the next day, one of our babysitters came by and said, I'm moving. And I had this old upright piano that I love. It was my father's. And could I store it at your house for a year till I get settled? And I thought, okay, this is getting weird. So all of a sudden, I had the idea that I should learn how to play piano, and a piano arrives. And so I went to the store and I bought a book on music. I'm trying to teach myself. And I thought, well, I can do this. What a joke that was. But being undaunted, I got the books and I started trying to teach myself. And I bought all the sheet music from the CD, which was stuff that was just miles over my head. But it didn't seem to matter. And I started trying to teach myself that as well. And so I'm going along this course, and about a month or so after the lightning, I have this very strange dream. And in this dream, the dream was like an out-of-body experience. I'm walking out onto the stage, and I'm at the front of the stage, and it's a huge concert hall, and I'm playing music for the audience. And I'm listening to this music, and as I'm walking up behind myself, I realize that this is not somebody else's music, this is mine. And I thought, what the hell? And so I'm standing behind myself, I'm listening to the music, and it has a loud ending, and it wakes me up. And I sit up on the edge of the bed, and I look at the clock, and it's 3:15, and I go out to the piano, and I think, well, let me try to plunk out some of what I heard. But I had no idea how to do that or how to write anything, so I just said, the hell with this, and went back to bed. And at that point, I woke up in the morning and went on my usual routine, going to work. But what happened from that moment on was whenever I sat down at that piano to try to teach myself, the music from the dream started playing. And it was a lot like a little 2-year-old. It wanted to be paid attention to, and if I didn't, it would become intrusive. It'd be like, Daddy, play with me. And if I didn't, it would start playing when I was trying to do other things, trying to do surgery. I'm trying to talk to somebody, and now there's this loud music that's playing in my head. And so I learned very quickly that, okay, I need to do something with this every day. Otherwise, it's going to haunt me. And so we came to an understanding that I would try to do something with the music every day, and it would let me have some peace.
All right, let's stop here for a second, because that's a lot to unpack. What you just told me. So I got about a bazillion questions for you on this kind of stuff. First of all, when the music came in, was it just in your head as you were, you weren't listening to classical music on the radio on the way to the car? It was all music that was classical music playing in your head. Is that what I'm understanding?
That's correct.
And were you able to identify, oh, that's Bach, that's, whomever, Tchaikovsky, that's whomever? Or when you heard the music, did you hear, and now we're going to have a sonata from whomever, and you heard the composer's name? Or did you just know that was the composer?
The only thing I knew was that this was music that came to me, and I didn't realize that it was my music until I was standing behind myself in this dream. And I was given the realization that, hey, buddy, this is your stuff. This is not somebody else.
But at the beginning, when you were being compelled to listen to classical music, were you compelled to go listen to Tchaikovsky or listen to Beethoven, or you just went to the classical section in the record store and just it was whatever showed itself to you?
When I went into that music store, that one CD literally jumped into my hands, and it was mostly Chopin, but there was some Beethoven also. So,
yeah, interesting. I'm gonna circle back around with the music. So I got some questions for you about that. Had you ever heard of a near-death experience before, being a scientist and a surgeon, for heaven's sakes? I mean, that's not something they teach in medical school, I would imagine.
No, at the time it was not. And in fact, it wasn't something that you discussed openly. In the early 90s, if I was to walk around telling people that I had an out-of-body experience and all of this stuff happened, somebody would call the state and say, you better take this guy's license away because he's a lunatic.
Right.
And, and that really was kind of the mindset of people and physicians at that time. It wasn't something you talked about. And you didn't have many patients that would come out of the woodwork and talk about it either. It just wasn't accepted. So it was, for me, it was a very private matter. My immediate family knew, and my closest friends, and that was about it. I didn't advertise it much. And then, so I just continued going along this direction of learning how to play.
Do you come from a spiritual family? Do you have a spiritual background where maybe somebody was seeing dead people? Were they seeing, spirits, or did they espouse to any certain culture or religion or any of that?
I grew up Catholic, and I was never a very religious person to begin with. And I think part of that was because when I was a kid, you had to go to religious education, and then I got stuck in a Catholic school, which I hated. And I remembered an episode where it was a mortal sin to eat meat on Friday in the Catholic Church. And I remember one day going to class, and the teacher says, well, the rules have changed. It's not a mortal sin to eat meat on Friday anymore. And I said, wait a minute. What about all those people that went straight to hell because they did? And that was literally the doctrine. If you eat meat on Friday, you go straight to hell. Do not pass go and do not collect $200. So, that poked a big hole in religion for me when that happened. But nonetheless, I was expected to be compliant. So to answer your question, yeah, I've never been much in the way of religion, but I did have some unusual experiences as a kid. And I think one of the other things that is noteworthy as a kid, I must have been an early teenager, and I was sitting in the kitchen reading a book, and we had this old refrigerator that made a lot of noise, a lot of white noise. And as I'm sitting there, I'm totally engrossed in this book, and I'm hearing this frequency, and all of a sudden I'm up on the ceiling, and I'm looking down at myself thinking, holy mackerel, what the hell is this? And I, just out of sheer fright, I was back down in my body again. And so I started reading my book again, and it happened a second time. And at that point, I stopped reading the book thinking, okay, just there's something wrong with this book and me. I'm not going to do this again. So, there's been some unusual activity in my life from the early times. And now this is a whole different level of
Right.
crazy.
Right. Well, I, like you, was raised Catholic, 12 years of Catholic schools. And, when you asked a question, I don't know if you got this, but I'd get, it's a mystery. Like, okay, great. That doesn't really satiate my curiosity gene there. But I will say that I believe that the Catholics and other spiritual religions or cultures, they get us prepared for developing our spirituality in life because we're taught about angels and saints and the Holy Spirit and, and that kind of thing. I don't know if you were taught the guardian angel prayer. Angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom God's love commits me. Here, I'm in my mid-60s and I can still recite it, because I said it every night as a child. And so I, unlike you, did not have dead people appearing to me or chasing me since childhood. I learned how to do this stuff. And it's fascinating, this whole new world, like in Aladdin, the movie, A Whole New World. It's amazing that it happens concurrently with that. And it's been my experience too, Tony, that everybody comes in with the ability. And most of us are taught by our parents or grandparents or a teacher or sometimes even a friend who will say, oh, that's just your imagination. That's not really happening. That's not really real. And so we learn to shut it down. And then something happens, like you're being struck by lightning, and whoa, that just really catapults you to a whole new level and a different frequency, which we'll come back about on that. Back to when your doctors examined you post lightning bolts and NDE, I'm assuming your heart and your brain all checked out fine. Certainly if you went back to surgery a couple of weeks later,
I mean, they put me through all kinds of tests and examined me, and they said, well, everything looks okay.
Yeah.
And
did you ever notice anything since you saw spirits as a child? Did you ever notice anything going on in the OR when you were in there?
No.
From a spiritual perspective?
No, I think that, when I went into the OR, I had tunnel vision. And you could set off a bomb next to me and I wouldn't know it. And I suppose that was a blessing and a curse.
Yeah. That's good that you were focused on what you were doing. It's been my experience, and I've been in the OR many, many times. As you know, I'm an inventor of surgical devices sold throughout the world. And here's what happens in the OR. I have a chapter in my book about it. When the patient's on the OR table, there are guardian angels over the head of anesthesia. There are surgeon spirits over the head of the actual surgeon or surgeons performing the operation. And then the deceased loved one's spirits, family and friends, are in a horseshoe configuration at the foot of the OR table. And there's always a correlation between how much prayer's being said for that person and how many spirits are in the room at the foot of the OR table. That's been my experience doing this thousands of times. And so I saw it real time in my mind's eye when I was still in that industry before I sold my company. And then now I do it remotely. So if somebody is having surgery, I'm usually in touch with their loved ones. I can tell you how many actual surgeons are in the room. I can tell you, who the family member spirits are. I can read the anesthesia equipment real time. And I can see what's going on. And I'll say, okay, they're doing this. They're getting ready to close. You'll probably hear from them, within 5 or 10 minutes. Or they'll send me a text and say, okay, they just took my dad back. And I'll say, okay, it's going to take 20 minutes or so for them to, get it all set up and everything. And then I'll say, okay, the surgeon's in the room now. So they're going to get ready and here's what they're doing. So there's always lots and lots of spirits. There are always lots of spirits in the OR guiding you. And back when you were practicing and giving you information, I'm sure you have lots of stories about something happening during a procedure in the OR where everything looked good, everything was falling into place, but you just had a feeling that something wasn't right.
Oh,
Give us a couple examples of that.
It's I had learned very early on, especially after the lightning. Whenever I went in the OR, I would always say my prayers, and I would ask my spirit guides and angels to help. And if it was really a difficult thing, I would call on Mother Mary. And honestly, I never felt like they let me down. But I, at that point, I was well aware that they existed.
Yeah.
And I remember after the lightning, I was in a terrible quandary. I was trying to understand, why did this happen? And I realized at that time that, the probabilities of all of this happening, the first probability was getting struck by lightning. And then the next one was it had to lose enough of its current to not turn me into a French fry. So it had to go through this building, lose enough of its current. It's going to stop my heart, but not make me not recoverable.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next thing that I had to factor in was there was a nurse standing there waiting.
Yeah.
And so then I started calculating all this in my head, thinking, okay, the probability of all these things happening is absolutely impossible. And so I realized pretty quickly that this was not a random event. This was orchestrated. And I thought, okay, why? And so at that point, I started seeing a psychic medium, Linda Dickinson, her name was. And I remember when I first went to see her the first time, and I sat down and we were starting to talk, and she was quiet for a minute, and then all of a sudden she started laughing. And I said, what the hell is so funny? This was not funny. And she said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm not laughing. Your spirit guides are laughing. And I said, well, what do they think is so funny? And she said, they're saying that that's what it took to get your attention. And I'm like, Jesus, you couldn't be more creative instead of hitting me with a 2x4? And, so I was very aware that they were around.
I have a couple of thoughts on that are coming in. So spirits, I call those divine downloads. But spirit giving me information that's coming into my head. Number one, I get, and I hadn't thought about this before when I was prepping for our conversation. I thought the lightning strike raised your frequency, raised your vibrational level to the level of spirit so that you could access that experience in your near-death experience and have it be so clear that you could remember it because you were so busy doing your doctor role and your dad and husband role and just with your regular life that you didn't have time to even think about it, is my guess. But this was just a quick way to raise your vibrational level. That's the thing that came in first. The second thing that came in is because of your background as a scientist and a surgeon, you're more believable because of all that alphabet soup at the end of your name, all those letters, and versus just some Joe Schmo up the street that isn't well educated, isn't articulate, isn't somebody who's a a revered person because of what you do and because of your education. Do either of those resonate with you?
Oh yeah. I mean, I felt very sure that that was part of it, and that, that I'd been given some message, and that was going to be a big part of my life. And I didn't quite understand all of it, and to some extent, I still don't understand all of it. But I know that I became absolutely a zealot about the music, and knew that there was something important about the music, and I didn't understand it. And I in lots of my discussions with other professionals and trying to understand um, what happened, and especially Oliver Sacks, who was my neurologist, and was a famous physician for many reasons. But he had felt like my brain had been rewired and gave me access to parts of it that I had no idea I had.
Frequencies. And it's interesting to me that you saw the frequency and that was such a vivid memory for you, that you were able to see energy in the frequencies. And everything's a frequency. We learn that as little kids in school, right? Everything's energy. And it's been my experience in talking with God only knows how many bazillions of spirits on purpose, is that every spirit has a frequency they keep throughout all their lifetimes. And in order for us to get in touch with them, all we have to do is think of them, because our heads are like big satellite dishes, and they receive and they transmit frequencies. So when you think of Elvis, that tunes your satellite dish head to Elvis's frequency, regardless of if he's reincarnated and how many times he has. He's still going to have the same frequency throughout all those lifetimes. And it opens up something similar. It's been my experience, Tony, to a two-way radio communication channel where you can communicate with him on that frequency. So I believe that the music part of this equation with you is all about the frequency and you understanding the spirit world through the frequency of music. Does that make sense? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I've often thought that the music has got frequencies in it that help people raise their vibrational levels. And whenever I have played it in concerts and at different groups and things, there's always people that come up afterwards and say, I was seeing these visions, I felt this, or I saw that. And, and a lot of people would come up and talk about the fact that they had a near-death experience, but are afraid to tell anybody about it because they're going to think ill of them.
Yeah, think they're nuts.
Yeah.
Well, I had that before when I learned this stuff 30 years ago. And I thought, if I come out of the closet, people are going to think I'm nuts. I had companies, I had employees. I thought, oh my God, how am I going to do this? And all of that. I do want to touch on the frequencies for a second. Certainly classical music is in the solfeggio frequency, which is, I looked it up, 528 hertz. And that's Beethoven, Mozart, Tchaikovsky, Bach, even Gershwin, Rhapsody in Blue is a solfeggio frequency. Have you looked into any of that with the
Actually, no.
With the music? Oh yeah. It's a big thing. And then you go to the Gregorian chants, to your point just a minute ago, that's 963 hertz. And the Gregorian chants are just an example, but they're believed to activate the pineal gland, raise consciousness, awakens intuition, increases positive energy, and provides clarity. So you think about back in the day, I interviewed a psychologist who's a retired priest named Father Sean O'Lara. And he talked about that the original purpose of religions in general, especially the Catholics, was to raise the vibration of someone so they could communicate more easily with Source, with God. So you had the music, you had the stained glass windows, you had the Gothic cathedrals, the way that they're designed, the incense, the candles, all that stuff was to raise the vibration in that church to help people communicate with spirit. It's really an interesting concept that I think we've lost throughout the years.
No, absolutely. I mean, we've lost so much. I mean, and I truly believe that we all have these abilities. We just don't know how to access them. And and when the music came to me, it was downloaded into my head, and I've had lots of pieces of music that have come similarly, and it's almost like a frequency that I tune into, and it just sends it to me.
It's that satellite dish head thing
Yeah.
that I talked about earlier. The other thing that I think is a really salient point here is that dream that you had. Spirit oftentimes will communicate to us in dreams, because it's been my experience that when we sleep, we all come in with the frequency of spirit, and then we live our lives, and we're busy and we're stressed and we're doing whatever. But when we sleep, not only does our brain rest, but we go back to the factory presetting frequency level of spirit. So it's easier for spirit to communicate with people in dreams because you're on that frequency. I would say spirit doesn't communicate on the I feel crappy channels because the vibration's too low, the frequency is too low. But I tell this to people, especially who've lost a loved one and are in deep grief. Grief is a low frequency. Spirit can't communicate with you. You're not on the right channel. You're listening to country music whining about mama, the truck, and the dog instead of classical music or something else, even classic rock, something that is, it's just not being broadcast on that channel. So it doesn't surprise me at all that that's kind of when the music started coming into you, because you were in the frequency of spirit while you were asleep. Does that make sense?
Yep. And, and I've had communication awake as well. And I remember one time I was struggling with something, and I wanted to try to find out if I could get any answers from the other side. So I dug out a Ouija board.
Oh, yeah.
And I was determined that I was going to communicate with the other side and ask these questions. And I remember sitting in the dining room, and then everybody else is someplace else, and I'm doing it just by myself, and I've got my hands on the planchette, and all of a sudden I hear somebody say, "You don't need the board." And I'm like, and then I remember thinking out loud, of course I need the board. And so I just tried to ask the question again and put my hands on it and expecting it's going to move. And the voice comes on again and says, "You don't need the board." And again, it's starting to get a little annoyed with me. And I thought, this is crazy. I do need the board. And so I did it a third time, and this voice says, "Look, you don't need the board. You can do it without the board."
Right.
And at that point, I was like, I was really kind of shell shocked, because now all of a sudden I'm hearing voices, and on top of everything else. But it was very clear to me that I have access. um, to that. I don't know how to listen very well because there's so much other noise going on in my head at one time.
So here's how you listen. You say something to spirit. You think of your mom or you think of whomever. And that, again, tunes your satellite dish head to their frequency. And then you say something to them and they're going to answer you, Tony, as fast as you can snap your finger within a second or less. Sometimes even before you've thought the thought all the way through, because time doesn't exist in the spirit world. Time's a human creation. So they've got your thought and they're responding before you sometimes even have it thought out all the way. And the more you do it, the more validation you get, the easier it is. And then it's just second nature. So play with it with stuff that doesn't matter. Ask to see a sign, ask for a question, say, hey, Mom, how am I going to know you're around me? And you'll hear a thought in your head. Yesterday, I was talking with a client and we had his grandparents and his parents. We were talking with them and they're all in heaven. They're all deceased. So we were talking with their spirits. And he said, can they give me a sign or can they tell me something that would let me know that they're around me? And I heard the word sawdust. And I said, like, this random stuff in my head, Tony. And I'm like, oh, God, they're going to think I'm really just, loopy or something. So I said, well, they're telling me sawdust. Are you a woodworker or what's sawdust have to do with anything? And he said, we're having renovations done on our home right now. And there is sawdust everywhere in our home. And I said, well, there you go. That's them letting you know. So regardless of how random the information is that comes in, you got to trust that first thing that comes into your head. Interesting point about the Ouija board. I don't know if you knew this, but it used to be the best-selling game in the history of all games, and it's patented. So I have patents. They're hard to get. I'm thinking I would have loved to have been the patent examiner in that meeting with the Ouija board inventor. Can you imagine? And the guy grants the patent. So what did he see in that meeting?
Yeah.
First of all, and when it became problematic was when it was used in the movie The Exorcist.
Yep.
Before that time, most families had one and families would play that game and contact spirit. Okay, let's back up for a second. When you started being obsessed with music, did that change your life at all? I mean, as far as your career or your family or your friends, did it have an impact on your life?
The whole lightning episode and not only the music made a big change in my life. And, before the lightning, I was on a pathway of wanted to go into academic medicine. And I was writing papers. I was the head of a big spine meeting. I was involved in a lot of research. But that was kind of the path that I was on. And after the lightning, none of that mattered anymore. And I was kind of lost at first because, I saw that as my purpose, but then that was taken and, just flushed away and like, okay, now let's deal with something that's really important. And so, I changed, and I think, my sister was probably one of the first ones to say something to me about it. And she said, you're much more aware and concerned about people and the feelings that they have than you were before. And I thought, well, it's an interesting thing to say. I mean, was I an asshole before? And I didn't realize it, but, I never got an answer to any of those questions. But I became very spiritual and not religious at all. And I had a hard time going to church. Just didn't seem like it had anything to do with the reality that I knew existed. And So but one of the things that came out of this was that um, I, I was not able to see people's auras, but I could feel them.
Mm. There's that
And
frequency thing again.
yeah, and if I saw somebody and I wasn't quite sure what was going on with them, if I just ran my hands over their body, I would hit hot spots where it was like putting your hands through an area of static electricity. And it's like, and I would they would say, "How that really hurts," and I'm not touching them. And then I would just take a finger and and go over near the place that was hurting, and it could actually bring somebody to tears. And I thought, wow, this is really powerful stuff. And I'm not, I used it to help me take care of people, um, but it had
You're
to
a
be,
healer, obviously, as a surgeon and as a physician in the traditional way that we think of a healer. And then after you became aware and got more involved in spirit, now you're an energetic healer as well. So
yeah,
what a powerful combo platter that is.
yeah. I went through the exercise of getting certified in Reiki and did all that stuff. And I would use a lot of those things in just the course of my normal work.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the the music kind of took on a life of its own, um, and that has continued as well.
So did it affect your relationship with your family at all?
You know, I got up at 4:30 and I would practice until 6:30 when I had to go to work, and then I would do my 12 hours, and I would come home, and I would be in time to have, most of the time they'd already eaten by the time I get home. Um, but it was always my job and my love to. I would put the kids to bed and I would sing them a song, and that was kind of a religion for me. It kept me bonded with my kids. And then after they went to bed, I went down to the piano and I started working. And I really was obsessed with it. And I would stay there till 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, and didn't do anything good for my marital status.
I bet.
And, my wife felt like I got married to my piano. And ultimately, we wound up getting divorced. And I think that was a large part of it. Um, but we never, it was interesting because we, despite being divorced, we made a place over the garage for her, because the family needed to stay together, and the kids needed two parents. And we really believed that it was important. And so we went about 8 years going around like this. And, people would make fun of us and they'd say, well, you guys aren't really divorced because, you still do holidays together. You still do all this other stuff together. Um, and at one point, we really sat down and looked at this and said, you know what, it's kind of crazy. And so we got remarried after about 8 years uh,
Wonderful.
being divorced. And I think that it was just a break in the action, so to speak, and gave us time to both grow a little bit and to understand ourselves.
Right. Right. And for you to perfect that frequency thing that you were being led to do as well. I know that you've performed. Are you performing now?
Yeah, I still do a fair amount. I do. I'm asked to give lectures and concerts at a lot of the IANS meetings, and I think it was in 2013 I got to be a keynote speaker at the big IANS meeting, and they had asked me to play the music at that meeting as well, and so I've traveled all over the country doing this, and I've had television crews from all over the world come and do this sort of stuff with me.
Who knew all that academic research and presenting papers at conferences was going to prepare you to do all the keynote speaking and conferences and concerts that you're doing now? But I can see how that was preparing you for what you're doing now. Do you
Sure.
see that? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, who's a tougher audience than other physicians and other scientists, for heaven's sakes? Last question. Why do we incarnate?
We incarnate because we have to develop greater spiritual awareness. And so I don't know if you've ever heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so you have this pyramid of growth and self-actualization. And essentially, spirit is very similar. We come into this life to learn, and we come with a pre-programmed plan, if you will, that we meet with spiritual advisors and teachers when we're out of the body and in between lives, and we figure out what it is we need to learn, and we make a movie, if you will, of, okay, this is the part you're going to play, and here's what we want you to learn. But you have one problem. You have something called free will, and which means you can screw this up at any time you want. And the unfortunate part of that is, if you screw it up, then you just keep going back to learn the same lesson. And that's unfortunate that, we're not aware of this sort of stuff for ourselves.
Interesting. Dr. Cicoria, what a delight to have you on this show. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us and share some of your wisdom and your brilliance with us. And everybody, that's it for this episode. Sending you lots of love from Sweet Home, Alabama. Mwah! And from Maine, too, where Tony is. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
To enhance your spiritual journey, click on one of the videos below and remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share with your family and friends.